You were talking about history, that actually you're not holding on to history, you're living here and now. So Budva have that both, you know, it has history and it has modern building. Do you prefer something more or less, and do you think that it's good combination to have it in small place like Budva?
Well, I think first of all, one has to take ownership of their history. They have to be very proud of it, and they have to really hang on to it. It's very important. So, for example, the walled-in city, the old town, that should be preserved perfectly. No new signage, no nothing. It should be just the way it was, you know, in 1400s or whenever it was built. Huh? So I'm a big believer in retaining and holding on to history. At the same time, with urban development is to build the new buildings and new things is what the world we live in now. So when that old town was built, it was, let's say, prescient technology, and that's what was right for the time. Now we should build what's right for the time. So I don't believe in this idea of doing, let's say, what one would call like a cheap copies. What is really called kitsch is to try to fake or copy history. So in other words, I respect history and I respect the present. I don't like that middle ground in between where we're pretending, you know. And there's a lot of this kind of mentality, especially I think a very 20th century mentality, that we would always have to imitate our neighborhood or react to the neighborhood or build a building that looks similar to the surrounding buildings. If you go to the greatest cities in the world, be it, you know, London and New York and all of Tokyo, you'll see a temple from, you know, 1200 next to a 21st century stainless steel building, next to a piece of glass, next to a 19th century building. London is full of that. New York is full. And that's the beauty. I think that's what really makes us aware of human history. And that kind of eclecticism is what makes a city what it is. So even a smaller town like Budva, that kind of extremities is the beauty of the place, because you see the history of humanity through it, you know, and you're aware of the past and you're aware of the present. I think that's great. I think that's the way all cities should be. The one thing I will add, though, is a lot of the history was very original of the place it was built in, because we didn't have communication like we have now. So when everybody was quite isolated, so you built of a kind of certain style and culture, right? But today, because of globalism and everything sort of being copied very quickly and imitated and trends and all these things, there's a tendency, you come to a place like Budva and you'll see a lot of buildings that, yeah, they could be almost anywhere. And so, and that happens in, whether it's in Mexico City or it happens in Tel Aviv, Israel, or it happens in, you know, or Moscow, and that's the downside of that. So what happens is, I think if we build new, we should be building things also that are very original from that place, or have something to do with that place, or even if they're just original period, even if they don't have something to do with that place, but they're only there. Do you know what I mean? So there's a reason if I come to Budva, then I see things that are in Budva that are nowhere else. And that's a very tricky thing, because, you know, look at our commodity right now. You wonder, when people go travel now, they used to always travel to shop, because you would buy something from a place, come home, you come back to the States, you go, oh, I bought this in Paris 30 years ago. You go, wow, look at that jacket, I bought it in Paris. Today, it's all accessible everywhere. So we don't even really shop as much anymore because of globalism. This is the things that are changing. So you think, what is left that's original? The food, the people, the culture, the language, the nature, and then the architecture. If I did a hotel in the city, for example, or a condominium or a building or anything, I would try to do something that really is, when people come here, they would only experience it here. They wouldn't see that place somewhere else. And that's what we have to hang on to a little bit. And that's the only concern I have with this kind of globalism.
That's tricky, right?
It's a very tricky thing, sure it is.
Because we are a Mediterranean town and country, we have a lot of similarities with a lot of towns around the world.
Yeah.
So it seems like a big challenge to you, I think.
Yeah, well, it's a big challenge. For me, I love doing that. It's a big challenge, I think, for a lot of designers and architects in general. And I think a lot are not doing that, you know. So, I mean, we're sitting in a hotel now, and it's a very nice and it's a very contemporary place, but you could argue that, you know, this is kind of this is very similar to a lot of things around the world. So it's sometimes it's lacking some sort of ownership or cultural relevance. And that's a tricky word, cultural relevance, too, because you don't also want to, again, like I talked about earlier, just copy. You don't want to go, oh, well, what's cultural in Montenegro, and then imitate it. No, you got to say, well, develop new local culture, a new local language, you know? And that's tough. It's tough to do. Anyway, And I think the spirit, and then we're living in a time too because of globalism. Is the spirit should be that if I come to a place, it should be super contemporary and feel like that I'm connected with the rest of the world, but again, still be original. And that's the challenge, I think, at least for me as a designer.
But you seem successful, whatever design you do, whatever you choose to design, actually, even buildings. You have your own stamp, which is very recognizable. First of all, colors, and then shapes.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a child playing with colors and shapes. It's full of positive energy.
I have to say, there's two things you said that I really love. Okay, you said number one is like a child, and you know what I realized? That the inner child in all of us becomes very dormant, and that we have to kind of nurture it. Because the beauty about being a child is that you live in the present. You have no baggage of history. You're free, right? And you have imagination, and you're inspired. And you love your surroundings, and right? Okay. If we all did that as human beings going forward, the world would be a completely different place. Instead, we suppress our creativity, we suppress our imagination, we suppress and conform, and then we're not childlike at all anymore. If you look at great artists, Pablo Picasso, Miro, Matisse, all these guys, all of them started, even a lot of like architects and designers, as they got into their 80s, even 90s, they started to become childlike, and their drawings became very naive. And you know what they were doing? They were intentionally, I concluded this, trying to be like a child once again, because they wanted that self-actualization, that sense of freedom of being in a moment. If we want to motivate people emotionally and really touch them, then shape, color, all these are catalysts for feeling, having better experiences, emotionally, physically. I mean, a lot of my shapes have a lot to do with the human body, an extension of us. So there's a pragmatic and a practical side of it all, and then the other side of it is to elevate the spirit, the feeling. There is a kind of energy and a positive thing that I try to imbue in my work, and it doesn't happen all the time. I'm not successful all the time at it, but that's my contribution. And when you say I have a stamp, which also I like, because it's not a style, it's a stamp, and the stamp is more that there's something in my DNA and my sense of the way I see the world and my sensibilities that have to be in the work, or someone else could be doing it. And ideally, frankly, we all should be quite different that way, because we all have our own soul. The hardest part as a designer and a lot of creative professions is to retain that soul of yours, what your expression is and why you are different or differentiated from everyone else. Because the reality is we're all completely different. So if I go into a creative profession and I'm just like everybody else, then why me? They could choose that architect, that architect, that architect. It doesn't really matter anymore, right?
Yeah.
So now that at least they say, oh, if I choose that architect, this is the kind of sensibility and style and vision, and it's very personal. Or if I choose that architect, maybe it's his vision or style or hers. And I think that's important to hang on to your personal contribution in this world. The course I took was I'm going to be creative, but I'm going to do something in this world that's going to touch a lot of people, and that was a decision I made a long, long time ago. It's not about being smart or being creative. It's about convincing people of ideas. It's about making things happen, and it's about showing people a different way of seeing the world or thinking or living or experiencing the world.